Thank you, Brendan. Oh, God, I've got out of mic, sorry. I thought I'd have to speak and project, but you can hear me at the back. This may sound a bit personal. Myself and Brendan have done this a number of times at a few places we've spoken where he says nice things about me and I come back and say nice things about him. But I particularly want to do it today because at the turn of this year and looking for signs of hope and enthusiasm, something made me laugh when I opened the papers last week that I really enjoyed. I opened up and I saw this D'Artagnan-like character wearing a big floppy hat and a colourful gown thrown over his shoulders, and it was Brendan Halligan, no longer a student, but now a doctorate. Doctor of philosophy, I presume. Letters. From my alma mater, UCD. And I said to myself, that is right. That's recognition of a lifetime of engagement in Irish public service that has been hugely beneficial to this country. And fair play to UCD and fair play to you, Dr. Halligan. It has been a tough 6 months. The last 6 months of last year was the toughest in my life, and I'm sure in political life in this country going back for a long time. Tough because of the debt crisis, tough because of the EU IMF deal we had to go through, tough because of the fiscal arrangements we have to make. I'm here as well to take up what Bridget Laffan was writing about. I also read in the first weeks of this year. I'm here to confront the European Union in the way that she says. That confrontation, that engaged confrontation, that sense of purposeful confrontation, that positive and progressive confrontation that we need to engage with the European Union. And I think that this Institute of European Affairs has been doing exactly that in a really beneficial way, as I've seen the last year. Go on the website, the Institute of European Affairs website, and look at the speakers that have come here in the last year and how they've helped us actually in that very difficult time to have Mr. Weber or to have Commissioner Wren at the key moments and key times to come in. So I want to commend the work, Jill, and everyone else, you've done here in that regard, and we should to continue that work this year in the confrontation we need to do on this European Union project. And in this upcoming election, in the early part of this year, to make sure that we contain that European confrontation in the debate we need to have, because it is central to the strategic decisions we need to make now as a country. I'll come back to that at the very end if I can. I've been, to a certain extent, engaged in that confrontation process for the last 3.5 years. Well, 4 years, 3.5 years. One of the things I've enjoyed most, one of the things I've learned most from in the last 3.5 years, has been my engagement on the European Council of Ministers, both on the telecoms and on the energy councils. Both of which, particularly the energy one, have been very active. Done a huge amount of work, hugely important work in my mind. And I was very glad, actually, to be able to engage in that in what I think has been a very positive contribution, representing our country. I want to just give some personal reflections and that leading into this issue about offshore energy and interconnection and how we develop our renewable energy system. I just want to give a few personal reflections along the process, the European Union process that has led us here, and then widen it out at the end into slightly wider political perspective. Part of that, I kind of said there, the kind of fearful aspect of the last 6 months was the whole euro area. How are we going to manage this? How are we going to put it together? How are we going to achieve the political objective of combining fiscal and economic policy with monetary, or with the currency union? And we have to do it, as Bridget Laffan says, like the three choices: ad hoc, kind of kicking it down the road, not going to be too good; contagion and serious disruption, that's not an attractive option; or thirdly, kind of being proactive and actually grappling with the fundamental economic and political issues is what I believe that third option we're going to have to engage in. In that regard, One of the interesting contributions I saw in the last 6 months, as part of being in the Council of Ministers, was a presentation that Mario Monti gave, former commissioner, professor, Italian, former commissioner for internal market, I think, wasn't it? To an Energy Council meeting. It was an informal meeting, but he gave a presentation, and it reflected the paper that the head of the Commission, Barroso, had commissioned him to do on the internal market, as to how do we strengthen, how do we reconfigure the internal market in Europe, recognizing that people are jaded, people are doubtful, people are skeptical increasingly across the Union on that whole internal market project. And it was interesting listening to him. Agreed to some, not all. Agreed to most of it, but not all. Some of the characterization, actually, the characterization he had of 4 different blocks of countries. I can't remember the exact wording. I think it was the Central European Social Model, maybe the types. Then you had the Anglo-Saxon countries. I presume we were included. I definitely think we were. Eastern and Central European countries, and then the Nordic countries, how he divided up Europe. I see it since, and there was all talk there about, we need to reconfigure our fiscal system, get our tax systems together, which I think was probably a very pointed kind of comment towards us Anglo-Saxon countries. And I said to myself, well, yes, we are Anglo-Saxon, but we're also very Central European in our partnership model and so on. So I think you have to be careful and sensitive around how he manages that part of the agenda that he says. But what I did agree with him on, and where I maybe had a particular interest in, was the benefit that will accrue to the Union if we really genuinely strive now for an internal market, particularly in 2 areas where there's likely to be the greatest growth, the greatest level of investment, the greatest employment opportunities, and that is in the digital economy and in the clean energy economy. By coincidence, the 2 Council of Ministries that I actually have responsible for. So I have a certain, as I said, interest in it. But they are, I think, there's common understanding now that they're the 2 economic areas of opportunity where we can lift investment, which we need to do, and where we can, particularly in the digital economy, create significant employment in services that Europe can trade internationally as well as within the European Union in its own right. And it's that, I think, paper and that approach from Professor Monti is something we should have regard for as we set our strategic direction in confronting Europe and saying, not going as a supplicant, not going as a victim, not going as a coward, but actually as a leader in Europe to say, in these 2 areas of the economy, where we know of something we are quite good at those 2 economies. We have a good digital economy in this country. We know something about how you develop this new internet world. And we're also actually reasonably progressive now on that new energy economy. So in those 2, we go to Europe with a certain sense of, we have some ideas here. We can actually help make this work for Europe in a way that works, and in a collective way, which we do need to work within the European Union. I was very taken, Geraldine Byrne-Mason, our Deputy Prime Rep in Belgium, in Brussels, a very capable woman. She said a few weeks ago, I was over there in December. She said it was important that we don't lose that sense of us having something to say, having something to offer, having some actual leadership role in the Union at this time. That at a time when things are difficult, and yes, we're in receipt of funds and so on, that we still stand up and actually play a progressive role, rather than, well, taking the traditional role, which maybe has been slightly too detached, as Bridget Laffan said, or slightly too focused on where the funding systems were. That's not what we need to do now. We need to now participate in a strategic sense, particularly in those 2 new areas of evolving important economic competence within the Union. As I said, I think we paid a good contribution in that regard in the energy area over the last 3 or 4 years. And it's an area where the European Union has shown that it can work, that you can actually pull together 27 countries and take coherent strategic directions. You read that book, Climate Wars, read before Christmas, about how the American political system has tried to achieve legislative certainty around how you tackle climate change. They have utterly failed. I mean, they can't seem to agree at the moment what day of the week it is, let alone how you would start taxing carbon or actually putting a cap and trade system in place. But we did that in Europe. We did actually get together and put in a robust legislative system on how we would actually start tackling this whole carbon issue. That's a huge achievement that the European Union should be proud of and should actually has to follow up on. The risk is, as much as we are ahead of Europe, America in the political ability to manage it, we risk falling behind China or other countries who actually seem to be going ahead on the implementation faster than we are in the European Union. And we risk losing what Professor Monti shows our current market advantage in this new clean, low-carbon technology market, currently a €1 trillion world market, expected to grow by 2020 to a 3 trillion market. We currently have, in various different product areas, between 30 and 50% of the market, of the world market. We risk losing that unless we can actually deliver in implementing now what the political system has put in, or set as our target in the legislative process that we did manage to achieve over the last 3 years in a whole range of environmental directives, and in our energy area, the renewables directive, and the third package, and a whole range of other different energy measures. I was very taken, so things that are said that you remember and kind of you think is significant. I remember about a year ago, I think it was, listening to Anders Pigbogs, the former Commissioner for Energy, now Energy or Development Commissioner. And he was just in a quietly way saying, you know, we really need to reshape the European Union funding systems so that they now match our climate change objectives. That we have this mad kind of European Union approach where we put in these very elaborate and very kind of well thought through legislative process, thought through with the Parliament now as much as with the Council of Ministers. But then we have a separate funding mechanism that doesn't really follow and back up and help us implement the directives that we have in place. At roughly the similar time, I think it was at Farmley, I was talking to Catherine Day, the Irish civil servant at the heart of the Commission system. And she said something similar. She said there's an opportunity at this time, as we reconsider the whole European Union budget process, to actually help tackle this climate change issue, to look at the likes of energy infrastructure investment and try and stitch that in to the new funding arrangements in Europe that exist from 2014 onwards. And actually the timelines to do that is now. To get the budget change in 2014, you need to arrange it and have it finalized in 2011 and signed off in 2012. So there's an immediate task in doing that. And I just said to myself, that makes sense for us to participate on, to help and to do. The new commissioner, Gunther Oettinger, is, I think, committed to, in this implementation phase of the policy that was set out in the climate change package. So we are now moving towards really looking at making sure that we actually do what we said we would do. That's going to be, it is difficult, it is challenging. Those 20-20-20 targets are kind of can be seen as a kind of marketing slogan, but actually they were about right in terms of the level of change they're going to demand from the energy companies, from industry. But we've got to make sure now that we do it. It's on that basis, I think it's interesting in that regard, or I'd refer you to the infrastructure package paper that the Commission published last November. So it's turning the broad legislative parameters around objectives into actually real packages now that will help us deliver it. The package says, within Europe, and a lot of this is for, not just for climate change reasons, it's for security reasons. There was a real change in the Council of Ministers. You could palpable, you could feel it. After the Russian government switched off the dispute that led to the switch off between the Russian gas link with Belarus and the resultant problem 2 winters ago, I think it was now, in a cold winter where large parts of Europe faced no heat, not being able to heat their apartments, and when it's -10. Imagine how if we would have felt like that 3 weeks ago, if it would have been -10 outside and you had no heat. That changed the political perspective in Europe around the whole energy security issue. And that reinforced the commitment, the political commitment in Europe towards tackling our energy future in a different way. And critically in that, in recognizing that Europe divided on that energy security issue is much weaker. That if you actually try and negotiate with some of those large fossil fuel supply countries on an individual basis, you're much weaker. We need to move towards a more fungible market, particularly in gas, so that it's actually easier to, you're in a stronger position. And that had a huge effect. So that led to the development of this infrastructure package paper, which was published in November, saying we need something like a €1 trillion investment to meet our energy needs, I think it's through to 2030. Correct me on the exact figures or dates on this, but it's a €1 trillion investment needed, of which about 200 billion is needed in electricity and gas transmission infrastructure. And in that electricity area, it's saying that there are certain key priorities. 4 areas we need to reinforce our European transmission grid system, starting with the Northern Seas grid. We actually, in the process of negotiating back in 2007, 2008, this objective, changed the word from North Seas to Northern Seas, which was a critical change because it recognized that it's not just the North Sea or the Baltic, it is also the Irish Sea and the Atlantic is what we have to take in mind here, because we're thinking long term. When you're talking transmission infrastructure, you're looking long term. So that crucial change in the wording to Northern Seas to include our seas was something I was very proud of, to be able to make sure it was stitched in there. And it is in the thinking of the European Union in this prioritization of that Northern Seas grid infrastructure within this new infrastructure package. You can see the paper on the Commission website that gives the details that's set out within it. And the objective is to quite quickly come up with the financing mechanism for that transmission infrastructure. By June this year, this is tight timelines we're operating in, is to actually set out how would we fund that €200 billion essential transmission investment. The indicative paper is saying roughly half and half. Half might come from pure private source and half from some form of public support within the European Union. It mightn't all be just grant aided. It might be new innovative forms of market support. That has to be decided. It'll probably involve the likes of the European Investment Bank or other innovative funding mechanisms to make it happen. But we're in a very tight timeline to actually set up the funding arrangements for that. That work is very much connected to the North Seas Memorandum of Understanding, which 10 countries have signed off on last month. We signed an initial understanding the previous year, December 2009. The 10 countries, Ireland, I'll start from the west, not in order of importance, Ireland, England, France, Netherlands, Denmark, Luxembourg, Germany, and Sweden, and also bringing in, some months later, Norway, recognizing that they had a crucial role in this whole Northern Seas area. So the 10 countries have committed to working together to, let's see, how do we develop this offshore grid? How do we develop our renewables? Given that this whole ocean energy area is an area where we have large-scale energy available to us in Europe, which is not easily available elsewhere. Some may say, and it's true, that shale gas has changed the whole energy outlook. And there's been a lot of investment in that, and no doubt there will continue to be. But it's uncertain still. It's uncertain in terms of environmental consequences. It's uncertain in terms of resource limitation. And even if it was a significant resource, you do not want to put all your eggs in one basket. Fundamental, think long-term approach. We have this very large renewable energy resource, which is going to be there forever and a day. And you have this other alternative where you're going mining down, you're exploding the earth, cracking it open, sucking stuff out. I'd like to keep my renewable resource as well as a strategic resource that Europe has and where we have the technological capability to develop it. And in actually developing the technological response, can then actually develop that expertise and sell it elsewhere to the rest of the world. So this North Seas project is looking to see how do we develop those ocean energy resources? But critically, how do we integrate our markets with this transmission infrastructure so that we actually have a more stable and a lower cost system? The initial estimate from the Offshore's grid study is that by investing in that sort of transmission, that interconnection, that by coordinating our development of our ocean energy resources and our integrated markets, we save about 20% on the cost of development. So there's a significant saving to be made by coordinating our work. There's 3 working streams have been set up. The starting meeting, as I understand, later this month, on grid configuration, on market and regulatory issues, and on permitting. I just want to briefly, I can only go into the very broad details here, and I'm being slightly selective and just picking out stuff that's of interest to me, maybe in some of the projects or some of the work that has to be done. The grid configuration group, chaired by Denmark and Holland, and involving ENSOE, the European energy regulators, transmission operators, and energy regulators agencies, and the Commission, is going to be tasked with looking at what actually is the grid we develop? What is this offshore grid? Where do we put it? How do we develop it? It will be helped by the modeling that has already been done by ENSOE in a 10-year grid study that 4 transmission operators have already done the modeling of. I was very proud that our transmission company, EirGrid, was one of the 4 companies. Andrew Cook's here today, and Philip O'Donnell, and I think Mark Norton were involved in that work. And I want to commend them. I think it was great credit to EirGrid that they were used in that regard on such a critical European Union project. And we also have now a certain skill and expertise, as I said, confronting Europe with our expertise and our ideas. So we've done useful work that's already been done, EirGrid, there on modeling this European integrated market and how it might work. And the grid work within this North Seas initiative is going to adapt that technology, look to 2030 as to what sort of grid can we develop, how we can connect up our offshore energy systems, how can we connect our countries and make it work. Look at the cost-benefit analysis, look at all the technical arrangements that will be needed to make it work best. EirGrid have already done a lot of good work just in our own area looking at that issue. They've been doing some interesting modeling looking at how would you connect up, for example, Irish offshore projects in the Irish Sea and then connect maybe to some offshore projects in the eastern side of the Irish Sea, near the Isle of Man or off Wales and so on. What they're starting to say, it seems to me, and EirGrid will be able to present the information in a much more detailed engineering way than I would be able to do, is that a mesh system does seem to work. That actually when you start kind of in the sense that rather than having just big interconnectors and then link into it, you can start actually connecting one project into shore, but then link the next bit onto another project and link that to shore on the other side. And by dint of just project development on a staged basis, develop an effective interconnected system on that basis. Is that, Andrew, a fair reflection of what some of the study analysis is showing? It's complicated. This is very detailed modeling and engineering we're involved in here. It's not, this is something you do need to spend a year or 2 working on to get it right. This is not easy stuff at all. This is honours maths, applied maths. This is way beyond commerce degree stuff. But I actually think that engineering-led approach is the right approach. You could top-down model it from an economic modeling perspective. Myself and Bob Hanna were talking about this morning, engineers versus economists. I think in energy and in transmission assets in particular, when you're thinking 50 years, you start from the basic engineering. You get the engineering right. The economics will look after it. I mean, you need to get that right as well. You need to integrate the two. You need to use Mark O'Malley and John Fitzgerald, put them together and get it humming. But I think the key to it, first of all, is getting the right engineering analysis, the power systems analysis to make it work. Critically within that, there's another body of work that we've been doing, just for our own purposes. We did commission a strategic environmental assessment of what our ocean energy resources are. And we looked at, right around the Irish Sea, recognizing that we have real potential in that sort of time frame that we're looking at in terms of development of transmission assets, in not just in wind, but also in particularly wave, certain amount of tidal, and new different technologies, floating wind as well as fixed. And I don't have the exact figures with me. Again, I can refer to the department website for the detailed study, which is very detailed. But it shows that the scale of the resource we have is huge. 10 times our existing, at least 10 times our existing use of energy, of electricity itself, without running into any environmental planning problems that we can foresee. So just it's such a large scale power resource that we have that it actually is there to be developed. And that's an important element in our own consideration of this whole area. I'm conscious of time, so I'm only just skimming over the surface of some of these working groups. The second working group on market and regulatory issues is, I think, a crucial one, because I'm slightly critical of the economics profession there earlier. It's actually, we do need to get the economics right. You have to have electricity that is competitive. We are competing in a global market where a data center can go from one end of the world to the other and be just as effective. So you have to be able to provide it with relatively competitive electricity to be able to locate it here so that your digital economy creates the jobs that you also need. The market and regulatory working group is co-chaired by UK and Ireland. And I think I was firstly, again, very proud that Martin Finucane from our department is co-chairing that working group. It's a huge responsibility and a huge opportunity for this country to make sure that we get our thinking and our ideas stitched in to what is a fairly central European Union project. I mean, this is deciding or looking at how we integrate our electricity markets in Europe with Germany, France, Britain, Holland, then Denmark. That is not a small task. That's a hugely important task that we have a critical opportunity now to get right. I look forward to our regulator getting right into the center of that process so that it makes sure it fits into our regulatory system and works to our needs. We have slightly different needs and slightly different perspectives from just about all the other countries. None of the others really have as much of an export possibility as we do. We come at it from a slightly different perspective. And a long-term perspective, a very large export possibility. So it's important in whatever arrangements are put in place that it contains that capability to trade renewables. I talked to Martin yesterday, he was saying to me, there's no real renewables transfer occurring at the present time in the European market. So we'd have to break new ground here. There are provisions within the renewables directives that we put in place over the last 3 years to allow it to happen. But there's still a lot of work to be done to actually set the market arrangements in place to make it happen. That work is going to have to be done in the next 2 years. That work can be done in a way that satisfies the Department of Finance, Department of Enterprise, and just about everyone else, that yes, this actually makes good enterprise sense for our country. And critically for the UK. Because I'm very glad that it has been co-chaired. I'm very glad to see the British Ambassador here today. And I very much welcome his support in this whole project area. It's very important that we get this right with our UK partners. Because ultimately for us, in that large-scale project development, it is going to be more of an export market than for internal use. And I think it's going to have to be something that suits the UK government interests as well in how we develop that. On that basis, we're very lucky. We've already done some good work. We established the ISLES project, which is looking exactly at these integration systems. How do we integrate the single electricity market we now have as an all-Ireland market with the UK market? We have a detailed working group, a consultancy looking at that, which will have its work. I think Bob was sending me today, concluded sometime in March, April, May. So we've done a lot of good work. We've also done some good work on the British-Irish Council, where they've taken on this project, both in terms of grid development and offshore development, and put it at the center of the whole British-Irish Council process. I think that's a very useful existing structures we have that we can actually now apply as a sub-region within this northwestern European region to make sure it works well, not just for our two countries, but also as a model of how you start integrating markets across Europe. So there's work there that's of huge importance that we need to apply ourselves to across the public service system, in our regulatory system, in our own department, and with the assistance with EirGrid and everyone else with an expertise and an interest in this area to make sure that we get it right and we make our contribution. The rough initial figures, it's just nothing certain here. You have to work this out and get it right. We could have the potential of developing something like 3 gigawatts of power for export in the next 10 years, if we were quick, recognizing that certain countries are going to be short of power fairly quickly, that they may have more difficulty than we may have or should have into meeting our renewables targets. So that's the sort of ambition, but I think ambition in that regard with a view to actually going even bigger in the longer term. Let's get it right first of all, let's test it, and then let's see if we can expand it. That would require additional interconnection. We have, when the East-West interconnector is completed next year, we will have a gigawatt of interconnection capability between our two islands. We need to expand that for something like 3 gigawatt capability. We need to triple it. And link in my mind, France as well. That in the European Union process, we already started back in 2006 in recognizing that these regional markets make sense. France, Britain, and Ireland are already in this designated European regional market. It hasn't been huge developments other than actually the single electricity market on the north-south basis. But it's there as an opportunity for us to make that interconnection with France as well, and a whole range of different trading arrangements across the region that lower the production costs of each of the markets, bring down the capacity costs and the constraint costs, and give greater efficiency and flexibility to all three markets. And I'd have to say in that regard, we shouldn't be we're not fixed in the technology. Like in that interconnection, there may also be capabilities as well as for offshore production, for the likes of a Spirit of Ireland, or other new developments, project development that people may come with us saying that that actually is a way that you could use such interconnection effectively, efficiently, for our benefit. So I think we should not be prescriptive as we go into this phase the next year or two in deciding which are the technological solutions that are going to be used to apply to such interconnection. And we'll have to work with the UK government in that regard as well. Because we're going to have to make it work, it has to be done on the basis of cooperation. Third group, and I won't spend as long talking on this, although actually I probably should spend more time than anything else on this, is on the permitting. France and Germany leading that, co-chairing that working group. It, as I said, is probably the most critical constraint. If you look at these big transmission projects, look at big energy projects, the biggest constraint is around permitting. We've seen it ourselves in our own difficulties in terms of building a north-south interconnector, building an east-west interconnector. What the European Union is saying is they're looking to develop, can we develop fast-track permitting systems to help get these projects through? We have a job here at home to explain to our own people why it's in our interests to actually build this transmission infrastructure, both onshore and offshore, and indeed to build the generation capacity itself. I got a letter from Roscommon County Council recently saying, commending the minister, would we not do everything offshore? And I know there's real sensitivity around transmission and distribution infrastructure going in around the country, but I've just such a sense. We spent in wind onshore even in last year about 400 million in this country. Now that's construction jobs right across the country. That's real hard hats, big iron construction jobs that we need in rural Ireland. If we don't build that, we won't have those jobs. It's also, as you build this grid out to different parts of the country, it opens up that part of the country for the digital economy. Because if I'm an international investor with any sort of sense of security, which everyone is now around the internet and having digital capability, you need energy security. You only get that with an extensive distribution and transmission grid. I'm going down to Roscommon County Council and saying, lads, would you not cop on? This is the jobs for your county, if you play it right. This is you put a wind farm in, you have a levy, you have an actual return, you have a rate space forever. Guaranteed, solid as a rock, paid for by the UK taxpayers, or the market. Be careful, Bastard, you can scrub that one from there. But this is a time we need to think strategically as a country to get out of any difficult economic period. We would be dumb to miss the strategic opportunity that exists here across this country. I want to finish, but I'm sorry I've taken too long, Brendan. I want to go slightly broad and back out again into the political sense of this. I read over Christmas Gordon Brown's book, Beyond the Crash. I thought it was very well written, very tight, very concise, full of moral fibre, from the Kirk, which is needed in our banking and in our capitalist system. But it was also very interesting from my perspective on 2 or 3 issues. Firstly, recognizing that it was, as he said, I think the subtitle, the first crisis of globalization. So recognizing that globalization has really advanced to a state that maybe we're not even aware of. I saw in the paper today, I couldn't believe it. Global trade grew last year by 10%. 10% in 1 year, a difficult year. It is, but through technological innovation, through a whole range of different political factors that go back several decades, it is expanding, particularly in the East, at a way that cannot easily be constrained or will not be constrained. The real constraint is, or the real issue, as Martin Wall was writing in the Irish Financial Times yesterday, is actually East-West now. How does the West make sure it just doesn't fall behind and lose out to the East as it adopts this huge new growth that is occurring? And that's important, I suppose, from an Irish perspective, because we are an open, globalized economy. We have set our course for 50 years in that direction. It's going to be very difficult, if not impossible in my mind, for us to reverse back into a form of nationalism that actually achieves our objectives, of social objectives, of creating employment, of creating necessary social services for our people. So as we, and Bridget Laffon's terms, confront the European Union, confront this crisis, I don't believe we can respond to it by a narrow return to nationalism, that sense of victimhood, the sense that we've been let down, that we are getting a bad deal, that we need to retreat from such global agreements. It's not going to work. We're going to have to seek agreement with our colleagues on the basis of actually continuing to trade, and trade which we can do very successfully, not just within the Union, but in the wider world, to make it happen. That's important, I suppose, when you look as well at using the banking crisis and looking at the people talking, renegotiating deals and looking at the whole arrangements with the EU and IMF and so on. It was very clear in Gordon Brown's book. What's very clear anyway, is that actually a lot of the decisions that have been made in the last 2 years, particularly in the financial crisis, weren't necessarily made at a European Union level. They were made at the G20. They were made at the G7. They were made in Seoul 2 or 3 months ago, or in Philadelphia, was it, where the previous G20 were the executive list of the meetings that they occurred in. Gordon Brown's very clear on that. And we need to be clear on that. We need to actually recognize that we need to engage not just with the European Union, but on the wider international stage for any changes or anything we're looking to do. We are not alone. We cannot operate and act alone. We have to operate in cooperation, in our own interests, but in collective interests to get whatever arrangements or structures we want in place. I just put that out because I think it's important proviso that people need to understand and see in this difficult time where we have to make strategic decisions. I'd also say, one of the things I'd slightly disagree with, not disagree with Gordon Brown, but a caveat I'd put in it, I agree with his Keynesian analysis that in this globalized economy, you have to, the way we manage to create full employment, to create this balance between East and West as Eastern incomes rise, is to expand. But there's a limit to that. There's a limit, a natural limit. There's an ecological limit to what sort of physical growth we can make. It's real, and it's impossible to break through. So we need to make sure that our economic development is actually sustainable in an ecological sense. That's a further just instinct, a further provision, going back to what we're developing should be these new renewable resources, because that doesn't meet that constraint. You don't bump into the natural limit resources that are there when we are all now, or we should be, in my mind, looking at this world in a single, globalized, Keynesian model of economic development. And that just reinforces the imperative I see behind this investment we need to make in our offshore grids, in our renewable energy. I'll finish with 2 thoughts. Again, there was a Council of Ministers meeting about a year ago in Seville. And there was a diplomat, I won't mention him by name because I think what he said was the most undiplomatic speech I've ever heard. He had been engaged in the negotiations between the European Union and Russia. He was a party to the negotiations on that whole gas crisis when it occurred 2 years ago. And he quoted the Russian diplomat's comments. And he said, I'm paraphrasing someone who was paraphrasing someone, this is Durt ban Lom, Gedurt ban Lake, Gedurt ban Ella, or this is a very, but it had a real, it woke me up. And I think everyone else around the council meeting. It was a long sort of speech, but I'll shorten it down to, he kind of basically was saying, why in Europe do you think your children are going to have the same wealth and opportunity that you have had? What makes you in Europe think that you're going to be as wealthy as you have been in comparison to the rest of the planet? Where are your resources? What is your secret plan? And we were there. It was hard stuff. My secret plan is we develop our renewable resources. We develop our people resources. We develop our research and development resources. And we develop this green economy that actually the world would want to trade, that will be sustainable. But it was a wake-up call. It was a sense that we have to be, we can't just be complacent. We can't do business as usual. We cannot in Ireland maintain our relationship with the European Union as it has been. And they shut up, just take the billions, say nothing, keep going. We have to actually start reconsidering what we do and be much more proactive, confronting Europe, as Bridget Laffan says. I want to finally confront the Irish public service and the Irish political system, saying that actually it needs to be strategic. It needs to come in and support this sort of strategic decision to make investment in our people resources first, in our research, in our policy resources, to back up the sort of people we have, the Mark Fanukins, the Bob Hannas, the Andrew Cooks and others, to actually get this right. It's not finalized yet. We have a 2-year period to finalize it, to set the conditions in place for the economic investment to happen. We can do it, or we don't. We can get it either get it right or wrong. I think our system, our political system first and foremost, and our public service system has not been sufficiently strategic and proactive and innovative and ambitious as it should have been in the last 10 or 15 years. We grew complacent. We can no longer be complacent. It's a time to work together collectively and in the European Union collectively to actually make certain things happen that give us a sense of hope, a sense of progress, a sense of opportunity. This project, developing our offshore and our onshore renewable energy resources, is exactly the sort of project, the strategic project we as a state should march behind, work together to make happen for our good and the wider good of the wider planet. Thank you.